Hello everyone, I am Demented Kirby, and welcome to my channel, the Commander Tavern. The Commander Tavern is a channel dedicated to my favorite Magic the Gathering format. The Brewery is a series on this channel showcasing my spicy brews under the deck text. On this final episode of the current season of the Brewery, I decided to do a segment I haven't done in quite some time, which is a toast. For those who remember, this segment focuses on commanders way down in ranking on EDH Rec, which is why today I toast the partner pairing of a new commander and a reprinted commander from Commander Legends, Kediss Emberclaw Familiar, and Ishai Ojutai Dragon Speaker. Out of the 1,596 possible partner commander pairings currently legal in the format, this particular pair is at the helm of only 22 decks in EDH Rec. Hopefully this episode can boost those numbers. If you like this deck or any of the cards I'll be mentioning throughout the video, please consider using my TCG Player affiliate link when purchasing those cards. You can find that link down in the description. It'll really help out the channel. A more significant way you can help support the channel is my Patreon. For just $1, patrons get early access to certain videos on YouTube. You can find a link to everything down in the description. In fact, patrons got a chance to see this video earlier. Alright, let's get back to the episode. Ishai is a 1/1 bird monk with flying for 2 generic, 1 white, and 1 blue. At first glance, those might not seem like great stats, but Ishai gets a +1/+1 counter on it whenever an opponent casts a spell. So in a multiplayer game like Commander, it's bound to get a ton of counters in between our turns. This is why I wanted to build a Voltron deck centered around it with Kediss as its partner. Kediss is a 1/1 elemental lizard for 1 generic and 1 red. Whenever a commander you control deals combat damage to an opponent, it deals that much damage to each other opponent. So Kediss essentially lets us spread the love. So if we smack someone with Ishai for 10 damage, everyone else also takes 10 damage. Unfortunately, Kediss' ability doesn't deal commander damage, so only the original opponent getting smacked takes the commander damage. But if we're able to give our commanders infect or have our damage output multiplied, then things get very dangerous very quickly. So let's see how we can achieve that. Since Kediss also counts itself for its ability, we can really spread the damage around. However, since Ishai is the one with the built-in evasion and pump ability, it's the main damage dealer. That being said, since the deck is running plenty of equipment for our Voltron strategy, we can also equip Kediss with any redundant equipment as well, so it's not just some lowly 1/1 familiar on the sidelines. Loxodon Warhammer and Shadow Spear are amazing equipment here since they pump and give trample and lifelink. The spear can also be used as some secret tech to get rid of indestructible blockers. For example, if anyone chumps with a beefy indestructible creature, you can pay 1 and take that away. Hexproof 2. It's also cheap to cast and cheap to equip, which Ishai loves. Colossus Hammer and Grafted Exoskeleton are even more epic haymakers. Ishai loses flying with the hammer but gains +10/+10 in the process. Don't worry about the equip cost, the deck has ways around that if we can't pay for it. The Exoskeleton gives Ishai +2/+2 and infect. As I mentioned earlier, with Kediss in play, as long as Ishai can give an opponent 10 damage, we essentially win the game. So this is definitely an amazing win con here with how easily it can be achieved, with 2/3 of the combo being in the command zone. Fire Shrieker and Inquisitor's Flail help deal even more damage. The Flail doesn't literally have double strike, which makes it even better since these two equipment don't overlap. So if Ishai were equipped with both, it'd be essentially dealing quadruple damage in combat. With Kediss on the battlefield, it'll do the same damage to the table, potentially killing off everyone with just one swing. Dalako's Crafter of Wonders and Rayaf Mastersmith are included to further push what the equipment can do. Rayaf gives all of our equipped creatures double strike, so if Kediss were equipped with anything too, it'd also gain any boons from these artificers. Dalakos is especially deadly since not only does he generate mana to cast equipment and pay their equip cost, but he also gives haste and flying to equipped creatures. Lightning Greaves, Swiftfoot Boots, and Whisper Silk Cloak are also included not only to give the haste, but the protection as well. The cloak doesn't grant haste, but it does give unblockable, which can ensure Ishai, or even Kediss, get through for that sweet commander damage. These equipment are ubiquitous in commander decks, but really shine even further in a deck like this one, especially Sword of Feast and Famine. Speaking of protection, this one gives relevant protection in the form of green and black, which are 2 of the 3 most common colors in Commander. Not only does Ishai get +2/+2 and that protection, but whenever it hits, we untap all of our lands. Considering that this deck isn't green, we need all the help in mana acceleration we can muster, but we'll see how the deck further does that farther along in the video. SCR Warwing Familiar further protects our commanders by making targeted spells cost 3 more to cast. If that weren't enough, it's also a 1/3 flyer for just 2 mana, so it can also serve as a decent equipment-wearing attacker or blocker in a pinch. As for continuing to ensure our damage gets through, Suen Xuan Lord of Wu and Archetype of Imagination are 2 of my favorite ways of going about it. Very rarely do players expect blue decks to go aggro, so what better way than to make all of our creatures unblockable. The Archetype also helps in making opponents' creatures easier to block as well by taking away their flight. They're a bit hefty to cast, but amazing once they hit the battlefield. Hammer of Nazan, Dark Seal Plate, and Shield of Kaldra are some additional ways to protect our commanders by making them indestructible. These are also pretty ubiquitous equipments in many commander decks, which is why they're a bit expensive, but they're a must in Voltron decks. We don't care if the board gets wiped so long as our commanders are protected. We also need all 3 in order to not just draw into them, but because Kediss should be protected as well. Akiri Fearless Voyager takes it a step further by making any equipped creature indestructible for just 1 white mana and unattaching an equipment on that creature. Not only that, but she also helps us draw by attacking with equipped creatures. They'd have to each swing at a different opponent in order to make the most of it, but that isn't a problem with this deck. In fact, it's encouraged. If we swing at 2 opponents with Ishai and Kediss, they spread their damage to the whole table and we get to draw 2 cards. Send some other creature a third way and we can draw 3 cards each combat. It's a shame she got double crossed by Nahiri because she's great. Leonin Shikari and Pure Steel Paladin also bring more synergy to the equipment of the deck. The Paladin is also equipment-based draw, but the deck is running 14 equipment, which isn't too low to draw some cards from it. However, it's included more for its ability that reduces equip costs to 0. Combine that with Leonin Shikari that lets us equip at instant speed, and we can protect any of our creatures from spot removal with any of our boosts in response to it. So they're very strong here. They can also be used to move equipment onto any unblocked creature in order to make sure whatever gets through is as dangerous as possible. Arden Intrepid Archaeologist also does something similar, but only at the beginning of combat on our turn. That isn't a problem if we have all of our equipment unattached to anything, so he's still strong here. It definitely pays off when we're recasting Ishai, but still have a battlefield full of goodies. Rogue's Passage, Slayer's Stronghold, Sunhome Fortress of the Legion, and Animal Sanctuary are some lands that can make our creatures more dangerous. They don't enter the battlefield tapped and can tap for mana. Granted, it's colorless mana, but most of the deck is colorless, so that isn't really an issue. The point is that they're all useful. The first one can make a creature unblockable, the second one gives +2/+0 Vigilance and Haste, the third one gives Double Strike, and the last one gives Ishai a +1/+1 counter. Out of all of these, Animal Sanctuary might seem like the weakest one, but if we have any mana at the end of a turn, we can just pay 2 and tap it to give Ishai an easy +1/+1 counter. With Commander games being lost over a single point of Commander damage, every point of power counts. Besides Kediss, the deck does have other ways to multiply the damage being dished out. This is especially busted thanks to Kediss. So first let's see some cards and then we can have a small math lesson. Sakashima the Imposter, Sakashima of 1,000 Faces, and Spark Double can each enter as a copy of Kediss without breaking the legend rule, except for Sakashima version 2.0, which literally does that. Having multiple copies of Kediss has our commanders deal damage exponentially. With just Kediss, each opponent would receive the same damage Ishai's victim received. However, with 2 Kediss copies, they take twice as much damage instead, except for the player actually smacked by Ishai. With 3 Kediss copies, they take 4 times as much damage. While that might be enough to kill off the rest of the table, except for the player smacked by Ishai, with 4 Kediss copies, they take 8 times as much damage. That might seem like magical Christmas land magic, but it's not some convoluted combo. You're simply having these clones enter as copies of Kediss. No extra setup is required. Fiendish Duo, Fiery Emancipation, and Jessica Thrice Reborn actually multiply the damage itself. While the Devils only double the damage, it also does affect the damage dealt by opponents to each other, so that's definitely a plus. However, the real damage is caused by the latter too. Jessica's Zero Loyalty ability will make Ishai deal triple damage to the opponent. Then Kediss has Ishai deal that much damage to each other player. So while Jessica's ability is only for when Ishai deals combat damage, if a 10 power Ishai deals combat damage to a player, it'll deal 30 damage to that player instead. And thus Kediss has Ishai deal 30 damage to the rest of the table. Fiery Emancipation is something else entirely. If Ishai dealt 10 damage to an opponent in combat, the enchantment makes Ishai deal 30 damage instead. Kediss then triggers. Ishai just dealt 30 damage to that opponent. It's going to then deal 30 damage to each other opponent. However, this is a different instance of damage. So the enchantment has Ishai deal a whopping 90 damage to the rest of the table. This is just insane. All from a 10 power Ishai with just Kediss and Fiery Emancipation on the battlefield. Earlier we saw how Pure Steel Paladin and Akiri can help us draw cards. However, those aren't the only ways to draw cards with this deck, especially since the deck has blue. Badalkin Archmage, Joyra Weatherlight Captain, and Whirlwind of Thought are some more synergistic ways of drawing cards. The Archmage might seem like the worst one since there is only 23 cards in the deck that will trigger it, but that's still 1 out of every 2 spells we're casting, which is a much better statistic. Next up, Joyra triggers off of 37 cards in the deck, which means 58% of the spells we cast will trigger her. It's a bit higher than the Archmage, but still relatively 1 out of every 2 spells. The enchantment is even better than that, triggering off of 42 cards in the deck, which is 66% of each spell cast, which is 2 out of every 3 spells cast. So it's safe to say that these are amazing card draw engines all on their own. Glenn the Voice of Calm is another amazing card draw engine in the deck and quite synergistic with it as well. I can understand if you wouldn't want to run Glenn or even acknowledge his existence as a card, and I respect your opinion. You can swap him out for whatever you want. But in a Voltron deck like this one, Glenn does some work. Considering how many ways we can pump a creature and make it unblockable, Glenn can draw us an insane amount of cards since he draws us a card for the amount of combat damage he deals, which, if you figured out by now, is quite a lot. So much so that the deck is running Reliquary Tower as its only other colorless source of mana. It doesn't take up a slot in the deck and can help us keep a fat hand, which is super important for holding on to those valuable responses to help protect our board. But we'll see those in a bit. Rhystic Study is another card with the potential of drawing us a ton of cards. There's no secret to its power, and I find it quite curious how bad this card was when Prophecy came out, but is so powerful in Commander that WotC now deems it necessary to reprint it at a rare instead of common, when it really should always remain a common, but that's a discussion for another time. Finally, Emergency Powers, Time Reversal, and Commit to Memory are included as the deck's independent card drawing effects. It might seem odd to include wheels instead of straight up draw, like my usual trifecta of Stroke of Genius, Blue Sun Zenith, and Pull from Tomorrow. But these wheels also shuffle our graveyard into our library, so we also recover any key cards that were lost throughout the game. Additionally, they can also simultaneously disrupt opponents. It does shuffle our hand as well, but if we're low on cards or have a hand we don't really need at the moment, we need to refresh that, especially when digging for answers. Speaking of answers, let's see the deck's responses. Pact of Negation, Fierce Guardianship, Swan Song, Dovin's Veto, Mana Drain, Counterspell, and Saw It Coming are the deck's suite of control magic, which is much needed since Voltron strategies tend to be a bit weak against Stacks effects and Edict effects. Indestructible, Hexproof, Shroud, and Protection can only get you so far. Even though this deck is absurdly fast in comparison to regular Voltron decks, it does have the potential of losing to combo decks if they're much faster, so being able to put a stop to those also increases our chances of victory. Teferi's Protection and Boros Charm protect our board from wraths, especially uncounterable ones like Supreme Verdict. Teferi's Protection takes it a step further by also protecting our board from mass negative toughness effects, mass exile effects, and mass bounce effects. It also protects us as well, which is quite the bonus. Chandra's Ignition and Slash the Ranks are our ways of wiping the board ourselves. Chandra's Ignition is especially broken here if Ishai is significantly large. That alone might be enough to win us the match. Slash the Ranks has the potential of sparing our opponent's commanders, but that's fine since it gets rid of everything else except our two commanders too, which is really all we need. So we always get out on top of it thanks to it. Vandal Blast and Cyclonic Rift are also a given since they're essentially auto-includes at this point. Overloading any of these will put us far enough ahead where we can potentially win afterwards, especially Cyclonic Rift. Winning right after overloading it isn't as bad as doing it to turtle afterwards, so it won't extract as much salt from your opponents. Mystic Sanctuary and Mistveil Plains are included as ways to get back our responses. The Sanctuary has the potential of doing it at instant speed if we fetch it with a fetch land, while the Plains is more for the long game since the recovered card is bottom deck. This is also one reason why the 10 fetch lands in the deck help out with more than just color fixing. As to how else we're going to fix our mana, let's see the deck's Mana Acceleration. Sword of the Animus is amazing here since it's actual ramp while also pumping our creature +1/+1. Equipping this onto Ishai helps in more ways than one, which is why the deck's running 9 basic lands even though it's a 3-colored deck. Keep in mind that the deck doesn't have that many colored cards. Cloud Key, Ethereum Sculptor, Foundry Inspector help reduce the cost of said cards since they make artifacts cost 1 less. The deck is running 23 cards that benefit from them, so their inclusion is pretty self-explanatory. However, since 2 of these are creatures, they also have the potential to help out with attacking in case we need more bodies to carry equipment. Urza Lord High Artificer is included not just because he's broken in and of itself, but because he turns all of our artifacts into mock sapphires. This is especially useful for our equipment that aren't really doing anything, so we can just tap them down to generate blue mana, which is never a bad thing. As a bonus, Urza also creates a token that becomes ridiculously huge in this deck, so that's yet another beater. Even though Urza's activated ability is insane, I don't really use it that often just in case I get a counterspell or some other response that I'll end up losing for not being able to use it. Storm the Vault is also another way to create mana. The deck is pretty aggressive, so we'll definitely be accumulating treasures thanks to it. It does only create 1 per opponent attacked, but as I mentioned earlier, that's something the deck wants to be doing anyways. Then when it transforms into Vault of Katlakan, we have a better Tolarian Academy since it'll tap for mana even if we don't have any artifacts. But who are we kidding? This is going to tap down for an insane amount of blue mana in this deck. Smothering Tithe is another given since the deck isn't running green. This is yet another reason why I chose 3 wheels instead of my usual blue card draw spell trifecta. On its own, it does some work, but boy does it go overtime when casting a wheel. Mana Crypt, Soul Ring, Arcane Signet, Talisman of Conviction, Talisman of Creativity, and Talisman of Progress are the mana rocks of the deck and the final and most obvious ways the deck seeks to accelerate in the early turns. There's really nothing more to say about these other than the deck needs mana rocks to get ahead, but at least we are reducing mana costs, creating treasures, etc., so we shouldn't be too far behind. The rest of the deck is just the rest of the lands. The deck's running all 10 fetch lands, all 3 dual lands, all 3 shock lands, Rogren Triumph, Command Tower, Reflecting Pool, Ancient Tomb, and 3 of each snow-covered basic land in case anyone's running anything that benefits us for it. Recall from earlier that we want enough basics to make Sword of the Animus worthwhile, but not so many as to color screw us. Also, as with all of my deck techs, it's not entirely necessary to run the dual lands if you don't already have them or aren't playing online. You can easily swap them out for Pain lands, Pathway lands, or Battle Bond lands, and the deck will still function just fine. Same with the fetch lands. This brew is just an idea of how to build around Ishai with Kediss. When I got the idea for this brew, I honestly didn't expect it to perform as well as it did. On paper, Kediss being the partner of a Voltron commander is too good to pass up. And while you can partner it with Akiri, Dargo, Crom, or some other Voltron commander, I found Ishai to be the most ideal because you'd have access to 2 more colors. Ishai is no slouch either since it gets crazy big the more turns pass. And this partnership also helps aid one of the many ailments of Voltron commanders, which is focusing only on one opponent at a time. If you're interested in the deck list of this spicy brew of mine, you can find a link to it down in the description. I would like to thank all my patrons for supporting me, and a quick shout out to all my higher tier patrons, the brewers, for the patronage. I'd also like to thank anyone using my TCG Player affiliate link, that also helps out the channel. And to everyone, thanks for watching this episode of the Brewery on the Commander Tavern. I am Demented Kirby, and happy brewing.